everyone, and welcome to today's AIM webinar, Securing Digital Identities, the Growing Risk of QR Code Exploits and How to Address Them. I'm Bethany Dean, the Media and Communication Specialist here at AIM, and I'm joined today by today's expert panel, Jeanne Duckett with Avery, Dennison, Mark Manning with iTRACE Technologies, and Sprague Ackley with Napeequa Concepts. We had speaker Kevin Bradshaw from Denso as part of this discussion, but unfortunately had to drop out of the webinar at last minute. First, before we get into today's topic, I wanted to share a little bit about AIM. AIM is the Industry Association for Automatic Identification and Data Capture Technologies. We serve as a hub for quality resources covering all types of barcode, RFID, and mobile computing information. We also foster new auto ID innovations that stimulate market growth. We encourage you to get involved. If you would like additional information, you can reach out to us at info@aimglobal.org. And then also wanted to go over AIM's antitrust policy. It is the policy of AIM to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. And then a few other housekeeping notes. All registrants are muted upon entering the webinar, but we still want you to participate. To send a question, you can select the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We'll get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. A recording of the webinar will be available in the coming days and sent to those that have registered. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeanne Duckett, who will be serving as the moderator for today's discussion.
Thank you, Bethany. So as Bethany said, my name's Jeanne Duckett, and I've worked with Avery Dennison Corporation. And the last several years, I've been focusing in food traceability and transparency, which has given me some unique insights to QR codes that have been appearing on packaging since around 2014. But in addition, I have a long history of working in developing in standards, from barcodes to 2D matrices to RFID. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Mark.
Thanks, Jeanne. Appreciate the intro. So I'm Mark Manning. I'm the founder and CEO of iTRACE Technologies. I've been working in the supply chain security and anti-counterfeit industry since about 2004, so just over 20 years now. In that time, I've been working with various companies to help them secure their supply chains against counterfeiters and other attacks. And recently, we've been working on a number of projects that are related to QR code threats and vulnerabilities. So that's part of the discussion today.
Thank you. And Sprague, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Sprague Ackley, and I am an independent consultant at this point after many, many years with various manufacturers of printers and readers of barcode. I'm from the technology side, so I've worked on creating barcode standards pretty much for my whole career. And one of those standards is QR code, and we developed that with AIM back in the 90s with folks from Denso, and that was at the time everyone was wondering, what do we need another barcode for? But obviously, looking back on that, it's been a very, very powerful link of the common person to information in the outside world. And so I did a lot of work on standards in ISO and also with AIM and also with GS1. And I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Sprague. So can you talk about what the QR code related to conversation?
So yeah, the most common types of QR code threats and attacks that we're seeing today are in three major categories. The QR phishing attack, or quishing as it's now being called, is a twist on the traditional kind of phishing attack that that people are familiar with from emails and phishing emails. That's where a QR code is posted somewhere to capture personal information or credentials by misleading the scanner to provide that information. So posting a QR code somewhere on a product, on a lamppost, on another public place that is going to request the user or scanner of that QR code to provide some form of personal information. That's a quishing or QR phishing attack. The second one is QR jacking, where a legitimate QR code is hijacked and replaced with malicious alternatives that download malware, capture credentials, or payment information. The most common areas for these kind of attacks today are parking meters, parking kiosks, EV charging stations are now becoming a big target in Europe. I was talking to an EV charging station company this morning about the threats to their charging stations and their customers from people replacing the QR code sticker on the EV charger with a malicious sticker that may ask them for payment information to charge their car or other information that would be stolen. So this is becoming a big issue in various parts of the world, specifically Europe. It's becoming more prevalent in the United States, with multiple cities around the US reporting these kind of issues. Most recently in the Netherlands, the municipality of The Hague in the Netherlands reported that their parking meters and parking kiosks had been attacked with a QR jacking attack to steal payment information. The third one is really unusual and evolving. It's a brushing scam. And traditionally, the brushing scam was being used to gain reviews or clicks on product information on Amazon stores, where a malicious store owner would send a low-cost product to people in the United States, and they would use the fact that that product had been sent to create a review of that particular product. This is now evolved. The brushing scam has now evolved where you will get an unsolicited package in the mail. Inside that package will be a piece of paper that says, if you didn't order this product and want to return it, please scan this QR code. That QR code may steal personal information. It may ask for login details when you get to a particular website. It may even ask for payment information to pay for return postage or packaging. But it is designed to steal account credentials, personal information, or financial information from a person who has received that package. And a good example of that was a friend of mine here in Silicon Valley received a bunch of fence posts in the mail in a large package that was on their doorstep. I'm sure the fence posts were low cost, but it meant that they had to scan the QR code to try and figure out how to return this big package of fence posts that was sitting on their doorstep. Otherwise, they would have had to have disposed of it some other way. That's a brushing scam. The FBI just released a warning about brushing scams and unsolicited package that are being received in the mail to steal people's personal and financial information. So there are three main attacks that we're seeing today, and there's obviously various twists on these, but that's where the focus is right now.
Thank you, Mark. So I've been working with smart labels since 2013. And for the people on the phone that are not aware what a smart label is, that QR code on the back of your packaged food today in retail grocery that was stood up by the Consumer Goods Forum to try to provide more information beyond the label information to the consumer. So it was really one of the first attempts, or an early attempt, to provide beyond the information. So that's been going on for a little while. Mark, can you kind of explain why QR codes are now becoming such an attractive actor for bad actors?
Yes,
We've
absolutely.
been using them for over a decade.
Yeah, so a lot has changed recently in the world of QR codes. Obviously, during the pandemic, people wanted to go to contactless everything, basically. So but QR codes are now being used on menus, on parking meters, in places that they haven't really been used very much in the previous decade. So we're seeing these QR codes becoming more prevalent in many, many different applications, from parking meters, parking kiosks. They're everywhere today, more so than they were previously. And the challenge is that humans cannot read the content of a QR code. They don't know what that QR code is going to do. So as these QR codes are now becoming more prevalent, the bad actors are using these tools to be able to scam or gain information about people and their devices. And the way this works is that a hacker will create a malicious QR code with their own information in that QR code. It may download a malware in the background, but they create these QR codes for their own purpose. They then send them via email, post them in public places. They could put them on packages. They can put them in packages to convince people to scan that QR code. Once they scan the QR code, the QR code and its interaction with the device will download an infected file or steal credentials or payment information. And that could potentially give the attacker access to the victim's device or credentials. Once that malware is on the device, the hackers then can steal payment information, login information, password information. This is one of the methods that organized criminal enterprises are using to gain access to corporate systems and services. If they can convince a user of a corporate system to scan a QR code, they can potentially download malware onto that device and then have access to the systems and services of the company they're working for. So the fact that humans can't read barcodes and they can't interpret beforehand what that barcode or QR code is going to be doing makes them a high-risk tool for these kind of applications. And beyond that, we've seen recently the Google Threat Intelligence Group has put out warnings that Russia has been exploiting QR codes in Europe to gain access to systems and devices. Specifically, they gained access to signal chat systems for the Ukrainian military to be able to intercept those chats and services. But what we're seeing really happening and what's coming along in the future is the AI automation of these kind of attacks, the setup of fake websites, the creation of these QR codes. AI is industrializing this process on a large scale, meaning that it's now an automated process to set up fake websites and potentially deploy QR codes in digital and physical form. Netcraft recently reported that AI has automated the creation of the quishing attack on a large scale, and they're seeing a huge uptick in the prevalence of those kind of attacks. So some examples of these kind of attacks, ING Bank in the Netherlands had QR jacking incident where their customers would scan a QR code, which would allow somebody else to have access to their bank accounts. It poses a greater threat when it's on parking meters and kiosks because there's a likelihood that you'll input payment information directly into the website that is connected via that QR code. And that's happened in Texas and Atlanta and other places in the US. And as I mentioned before, it was only a week or so ago that The Hague in the Netherlands reported the similar kind of attack. And these are three among many, many news articles and reports that have occurred recently.
Yeah, thank you for that information. So what you've been discussing is if you go ahead and scan a code that you receive in a parking meter or something that's next to an ATM machine, that obviously you may be entering sensitive data. But it's not just sensitive data that you need to be concerned about. These people might just be interested that you exist. So you have to take more care with that type of information. But the one thing I want to kind of reflect on is the increasing use of QR codes. So we talked about the pandemic. So now you see QR codes being used for menus, for payment systems, for parking meters, and for all these applications. But in the retail supply chain or the pharmaceutical supply chain, we're also starting to see a proliferation of barcodes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these barcodes have been available for well over a decade. Sprague mentioned that, we worked on the standards way back in the 90s. But what's been occurring recently that brings a new aspect to this is the emergence of legislation. Legislation such as in the United States, FSMA 204, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, or in Europe, the Digital Product Passport.
Crew alerts.
Yeah, so I can expand on that a little bit. As Jeannie said, there's a legislation coming along that is requiring all products to be sold in Europe to have QR codes on those products. And it's not a big stretch to imagine counterfeiters doubling down on their criminal activity by also trying to phish or quish information from consumers who are scanning the QR codes that are mandated on these products and are mandated to be scanned using only the native camera on the device without the use of a security app. Now, security apps are obviously optional, but the requirements are that these QR codes be scanned with the native device and don't require any additional input or interaction with the user. So legislation is making a huge push to put in QR codes on every product. DPP in Europe and in the US, there's a potential for Sunrise 2027 from GS1 to also require the replacement of a 1D code for checkout at a supermarket or grocery store into a QR code to provide greater interaction with the consumer. So that's the direction that legislation is taking the use of QR codes. And we're going to see billions and billions more products having QR codes on them in the near future, which I think, in our opinion, is going to exacerbate the attack surface or greatly increase the attack surface that the counterfeiters, quishers, fraudsters are going to have to interact with consumers and their devices.
Yeah, I want to add to that with a little bit of a variation in the DPP. If people here aren't familiar with that, it's a big effort in Europe, essentially to provide consumers with trusted product information, and they have mandated, or it's still in process, so there's not a law, it's still being developed, and the mandate is that the symbol needs to be readable with the native app. It doesn't. What it's saying is it's not good enough to say you have to download an app in order to read the symbol. However, once you read the symbol, you do not have to go immediately to that website. You can configure your device to show you what the web address is, which for those who are a little more web savvy, especially those who use computers and are very familiar with web addresses that don't look quite right, that's probably the easiest first step to use. And in the GS1 plan with 2D codes, which is kind of, they're shooting for 2027, they're not going to mandate 2D codes being added to products. They are making that an option. Right now, not everybody at the point of sale worldwide can read a 2D barcode because their scanning technology is a linear type scanning technology, which is what the EAN UPC symbol is. And that is not going to go away. The EAN UPC symbol can remain as long as a brand wishes it to, but if a brand wishes to add a 2D symbol, they are allowed to do that. And in 2027, or maybe a few years after that, if the brand wishes to drop the 1D symbol, they can do that. But there's no mandate to replace the 1D symbols. And the thing that Mark has mentioned, and the thing that has gotten most of the press, are these applications where someone goes around to something like parking meter or kiosks, and they get a cheap little label printer, they print out a QR code with the information they want, and they stick that label on top of a label, or usually printed material that's already there. And so if you are aware that this could happen, even without looking at the web address, if you see a sticker on top of a poster at a parking garage, highly suspicious situation there.
Thank you, Sprague. That's really useful information. I want to dig back and more into that here in a second. But going back to your retail example, yes, I agree. 2027 is hopefully going to be the start, or of the additional, the 2D code on packaging. But as I mentioned, brands, especially your large CPG brands, have been putting QR codes on packages for well over a decade. If you go by any Nestle, Procter & Gamble, J&J product today, you're going to find a 2D symbol on that code. So what types of things can happen with barcodes in stores? Well, one of the most common attacks today is people replacing barcodes, one barcode for another barcode, and going through self-checkout. For instance, I take a single serving size barcode for a cereal and place it over a family size barcode of cereal, and then I check out. That is a very manual type of attack. So it's unlikely that it is definitely an issue. Retailers need to be aware of it, but it's unlikely to really proliferate. But that's, as Mark mentioned, QR codes are really, really expanding in usage. And I certainly agree with that. That is the way we are moving into a connected world more and more. And that's a good thing, but it also brings risk. So Sprague has already mentioned two really good countermeasures you should take. If there's a sticker over a barcode that you're thinking about scanning, you should really ask yourself whether or not you should scan it. Another way that you can do mitigation you can take is you can get a third-party app like from a security company, which I run on my cell phone, and it, just like on your laptop or notebook device, it will examine the site before you go out to it and tell you whether or not it's a safe site. Mark and Sprague, what other mitigation aspects can people take?
Sprague, I'll let you start off.
Yeah. So this question is about businesses. If you are a business and you are finding that your products are getting spoofed with fake QR codes, that's a difficult situation. Typically, those businesses are higher value items, and in those situations, there are well, first of all, I want to point out QR code is by itself a publicly available standard. So that's why it's so good and it's proliferated so broadly, because anybody can print and read a QR code symbol and it can be used anywhere in the world. So that's because it's standardized starting with AIM and is now an ISO standard. If you need really to add security against this type of thing, you need a way to authenticate it. And there are ways to authenticate in addition to a QR code, one of which, unfortunately, Kevin is not here from Denso, but there is a version of QR code that you can get, which adds a kind of a secret cipher inside of it. And so if you scan that QR code and have an app to pick that up, and someone just copies and makes a new QR code with the data that they want, that cipher will fail and it can be detected immediately. My former employer of mine, Digimarc, just yesterday came out with a press release that they've now developed a digital watermark that, one, is very difficult to see, if not impossible for humans to see, but more importantly, it can't be copied. So if you just make a new QR code or just copy the QR code that's already there, you will not be able to copy the watermark, and apps available that can be loaded onto your phone for free will immediately detect that.
Yeah, I think part of the challenges with some of those technologies is they're not compatible with solutions or legislation like the digital product passport. They won't necessarily protect you unless you have that specific app for that specific technology loaded on the device. They can augment the QR code of the application, but they don't necessarily or are not able to replace that in the DPP example. So what we're seeing as mitigation steps in the parking meter and parking kiosks is that the municipality of The Hague is making daily inspections of all of their parking meters and all of their parking kiosks to try and identify when a system has been restickered or a sticker has been replaced. Again, the native app on the camera will not detect that a QR code has been manipulated or modified by itself. It would require the apps that Sprague was talking about from Digimarc and potentially iTRACE. The QR code spec, as Sprague actually mentioned, is an open spec. Anyone can read it. Anyone can deploy QR codes. Anyone can read QR codes. Has no inherent security built into that specification. So it's very challenging on a business application to be able to provide security into that QR code itself. You would need to add a layer of security alongside or augment that code with additional security to try and help the user or the application.
Yeah, and you mentioned digital passport. I want to emphasize again, it is still being developed, and there are some applications that just plain you can't put a QR code on and have it last as long as the DPP folks want, for instance, on floor tiles. But there's nothing in the current drafts at this point preventing you from adding another layer of authentication. As long as you have the base layer that gets you product information as a business, you are fully able to add any additional security features that you wish.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Like I say, that's correct. I agree with Sprague on that. That's exactly where the direction of it is going.
Right. And so I just want to take a couple questions before we continue on. We have one question that says, it's fine to say you configure your device to show the URI, but what if it's dynamic? Is that really feasible? Are people going to recognize it? That's why, and I'll let Sprague go ahead and answer that. I would just add that, well, that's why, third-party softwares right now, and usually third-party softwares start before things become base features. That's why a third-party software, like one of the security companies, are, a viable alternative to have on your device to check the security of that website. But Sprague, how realistic is it for people to read the contents of a QR code?
Obviously, I like reading QR codes and seeing what's in them. And oftentimes I'm a little bit surprised myself. It'll say a string of digits underneath and there's all kinds of stuff in there. But it's the domain name that's really the key to look at. And if you are a computer user, even not even dealing with your phone, but just your computer, and you get some email and it says push this button to go somewhere. My habit is to right click on that and look at the address that it's sending me to. That's just me. But same habit I have whenever I read a QR code before I choose to send it to the website that is encoded in the QR code. How practical is that? Well, those of you on the call are probably a little more computer adept maybe than the typical consumer. And probably most of you would have no problem with doing that, but I can't disagree that it's not going to be a solution for everybody out there.
So some of the other things we're seeing around that kind of attack with the QR codes is what's called the homoglyph or the homograph attack, where characters within a domain name are being changed to a different font that looked very similar to the original domain name. So it's becoming more difficult for an average user or even an expert user to be able to identify if that domain name is the valid domain name or not. For example, Google.com with an L and Google.com with a 1 in replacement of the L. It looks the same on the device, it looks the same on the screen, but it will take you to a different website. So even that kind of scrutiny is very, very difficult to achieve unless you're an expert in these issues. And I know everybody on this panel is an industry expert with many, many years of experience, but grandma and my nephew and niece do not have that awareness and that technical capability to be able to inspect these codes. So we need to be able to try and identify more secure ways of doing this. As Jeanne pointed out, security applications may be necessary that augment the standard QR codes in these applications.
Yes. Thank you, Mark.
Something that Kevin mentioned. It's really too bad that Kevin's not going to be here from Denso. He has a lot of experience with using QR codes, but he pointed out that the QR codes that you see are not necessarily going to be scanned by anybody that is particularly expert at it, and so that's really a good point.
That is a good point. And that kind of gets into our second question. The source of the misuse of QR codes comes from that automatic redirect. Are there any plans for certificates, signing, safe modes for the OS to show the URL and ask permission with warnings? And I think that's definitely, you're starting to see that as built-in functionality on laptops. That's definitely one potential way that cell phone or mobile operating systems can go. I think that's what those third-party security apps are attempting to provide, that type of a service. Mark, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's the same as the implementation of that kind of technology is similar to the SSL certificate deployments for browsers and websites. And having an SSL certificate before you can create an HTTPS connection to a website is part of the security of the overall internet right now. Obviously, there are challenges to issuing SSL certificates for every kind of QR code that is going to be created. That's the challenge with that application. And then you've got to have a QR code reader that is going to analyze that certificate and verify the information in the QR code matches that certificate. So who is going to be the certificate authority for the issuance of QR codes on the scale that we're looking to deploy them in the near future? And I think that's the big challenge with that kind of security application. I know it's been mentioned on some of the DPP task force calls, and is deemed at this time to be impractical to deploy. So there needs to be some other kind of security layer that we've got to work out in the interim to understand how can we secure the information in these codes, or verify that a QR code that is stuck on a parking meter or a package is the one that was intended to be on that parking meter and package.
Right.
Yes.
And another thing Kevin mentioned is that the carriers, the cellular carriers, some point in the future may start to feel some pain if consumers, get basically scammed and get together with a class action lawsuit. That might wake up the carrier community to make some of these features, included in their security systems.
Yeah, and I think my response has been to that is what level of elder fraud and elder scams are enough to kick off that activity and to have them start doing that. Obviously, they're only going to wait till it's absolutely necessary. And
Right.
I'm just concerned that there's going to be a large level of savings lost by people before that actually happens. So again, I think there's a lot of areas for improvement here. I don't know that I have the answers to all of them, but there's certainly things that people are looking at.
Yeah, and which points out that currently this is not a gigantic problem, like for instance, gift cards. That's $1 billion problem with people scraping off the gift card digits and sucking the money out and then putting it back on and entering it back in the system. We're not in that league at this point. And then 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, some of you may remember credit cards used to be, you just would use a physical device to imprint them. And then, people realized they could get the carbon out of the garbage and steal your credit card number. And that was a big problem. And now we have chips in cards, and we have, holograms on them and all that kind of stuff. So we're just not quite at that level of fraud. But the point of this whole session, of course, is to alert people that it's a direction that some people are already taking to use these QR codes in a nefarious way. And generally that will continue until the problem gets big enough and some of these other solutions will be implemented on a global scale.
Yeah, there's already been some follow the money articles in out of the UK. A UK police officer was scammed initially out of his parking fee and subsequently out of $30,000 or pounds of his savings. He then contacted some people that he knew within law enforcement and some investigative journalists. They followed the money on those the scam that he fell victim to, and found that it was actually hundreds of millions to billions of dollar industry globally, as it's been criminalized with international criminal enterprises. So we are seeing large numbers across the globe of loss through these attacks. We're not seeing that kind of scale, I agree, within the United States at this time, but we are seeing some attacks in the US starting to grow.
So thank you, Mark, for that perfect lead in. One of the things we've been talking on here is we've touched on standards so far, and this is one of our questions. If we had a wish list for standards for the next big development within the standards organization, or AIM guidance documents, or GS1 or ISO guidance documents, what would that be? Sprague, what do you think, the standards response to something like this should be?
Well, the good news and bad news of standards, of course, is that you have something that everybody can participate in. And so there's no real way with QR code to add a layer of security unless the creator of the QR code, like the brand, wishes to add something either in a secondary way or in a way that is potentially can be caught with an app that the brand provides. There's really not too much you can do with that. There are some security standards, specifically some crypto standards in ISO. There's a digital signature standard in ISO and several others, but all of those require a brand that really has a authentication issue, and in some of those cases they have identity problems, where you want to make sure someone's identity is kept secure. So these are different layers, and they are standardized, but it's not really the kind of thing that you're going to be able to put into a QR code on a cereal box.
Mark, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I think there's a challenge, certainly with the standards portion of this, in that a standard takes many years to agree and ratify. Obviously, the QR code standard was done a long time ago. There's modifications to that. I've been involved in a couple of these standards discussions. They just seem to take so long to ratify. So to me, there's a more urgent need, and perhaps the urgent need is that the brands that could be threatened by this, or the brands that are concerned about their customer base being affected by these kind of attacks, would add some form of additional security to their products alongside the existing QR code and DPP. As Sprague pointed out earlier, something like Digimarc, something like iTRACE, that would be an augmentation to the current DPP implementation or QR code implementations that would add a layer of security as a stopgap between now and when there is a standardized, agreed security layer to these codes.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for today's webinar, the AIM Global, really GS1 as well, we really focus on standards involving with supply chain, barcodes, and physical standards on devices, or physical symbols, whether they're Digimark, watermarks, RFID, barcodes, 2D barcodes. There is another layer to this. The International Telecommunications Union, who governs the standards around smart device operations, could also approach it from that way. So when we're talking about the address to standards here, we're really talking from the symbol and the symbol carrier approach. And this might end up being a multi-layer approach at the end of the day and how this is addressed. So the next question I'd like, go ahead.
Before we get to more questions, there are a number of questions from the audience, and I was wondering if we could address those, because I know when I go to a talk, I really don't like it when the speakers just blab right until the end and we only have 5 minutes for questions. So
we've been
you want to do some of those?
Yeah, so we've done about 4 of them so far. I've worked in. So I hope you guys are listening for your questions. So another question is how's the industry going to balance convenience versus security? No one's going to spend minutes checking the validity of a QR code to then be redirected to the site to either enter payment information or get more additional data. So how does this happen? Mark or Sprague? Yeah. You know, how do you balance convenience versus security? And I think no matter what the application is, whether it's a data carrier, whether it's a NFC or a credit card, there's always that type of a balance.
Yeah, and I think this is a big challenge because the whole drive of legislation like DPP and some of the brands of what they're doing is to have a very low friction of engagement with the consumer with little regard at this time for security of those applications. So the balance right now is, I think, way over to the convenience side versus the security side. And I think part of the challenge we have as an industry is that we need to admit we have a problem first, so as we can then address the right level of solutions and create that balance between what is convenience and what is security. And I think the big challenge we have today is that we're not yet, as an industry, admitting that we have the big enough problem before we can address it with solutions that bring that balance back to the center of convenience versus security.
That's a tough question. It obviously depends on the magnitude of the problem. You know, in the early days of internet, I remember if I had to send an email, I'd drive near an apartment complex and open up my computer and camp on their internet. And then people started realizing, geez, you know, illegal things were happening at times in these internet hotspots that didn't have a password. And so now, of course, that's decades old type technology. We all put up with passwords to get into internet. That's just because it became a really big problem. In this case, the convenience right now is very high, and hopefully it won't become as huge a problem as it became with credit card fraud, and is certainly the case with gift cards and things like that. But as the size of the problem increases, then there will be solutions, and as Kevin pointed out, it will probably have to occur somewhere in the data in the air carrier space. But as far as getting QR code information from a brand, you know, if it's a static code printed on a package, probably pretty low chance that, you know, that's going to be a problem. If you see a sticker on something, then that's probably a pretty big chance it's going to be a problem. And I think, sadly, until there's pain, there's not going to be a lot of big changes that are going to occur.
So we have an excellent question from the audience right on that subject, Sprague. So in India, they've been using QR codes to get authentication for pharmaceutical drugs. Just this year, there's been two in April of 2025 and another one in August with hypertension drugs. Fake QR codes were discovered. And this is a large-scale fraud, apparently in the Indian pharmaceutical market. And so they've already started looking and proposing different ways of solving this, including advanced authentication, which we've been talking about, a system overhaul saying that, this QR code has flaws that embolden counterfeiters. And of course, there's always more rigorous enforcement that could be requested. So Mark or Sprague, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I've been following this quite closely through some industry contacts that have been highlighting some of the issues with the India drug supply chain traceability. It was originally implemented to try and fight counterfeit pharmaceuticals within India and in the export market to other countries. The export market application, I think, was suspended maybe a year or so back due to being ineffective. And the domestic implementation of track and trace with QR codes, my understanding is also has been suspended or is about to be suspended due to its lack of effectiveness at fighting counterfeits in the India drug supply chain. So I think there's lessons to be learned from what India implemented with its QR code-based track and trace system. And I think one of the biggest lessons is that track and trace does not equal authentication. To authenticate a product requires another layer of technology above and beyond track and trace, and just replacing the QR codes on product packaging in that way does not defend against counterfeit. To Sprague's point, the pharmaceutical industry in India required that the QR codes were put on the product. They didn't re-sticker those products with new QR codes. The counterfeiters printed packaging with malicious or fake QR codes already on them. It's a very, very minimal step for a counterfeiter to create look-alike packaging with brand new QR codes that are not re-stickered product. So that is going to be easy to do for other kinds of products, other consumer packaged goods that are perhaps less expensive than pharmaceuticals, but certainly have a much higher volume and are more attractive to counterfeiters. So I think these are some of the things that have been learned from the India drug supply chain track and trace that I would love to see shared with other countries in the world who we know today are trying to replicate that very system without understanding the risks involved.
Yeah, that's a good point. There was another also large scale counterfeit for alcohol in China, where it was a malicious attack in the fact that they wanted you to accept the counterfeit product as being real, but they didn't do actually any data collection. But counterfeit product also went out and pointed to a counterfeit site. So we have a question from the audience. Being a server provider, we've developed a mobile application to scan QR codes. What security layers should we consider to protect the customer's data? Sprague?
Well, so the
Well,
typical
go ahead, Mark.
to protect the customer's data, you would have the typical security layers that would protect that data once it arrives on your service. So obviously using HTTPS for your connection between your specific mobile app and the services that are responding to that mobile app, and then ensuring that that personal information is stored securely on those services and servers themselves. In these kind of applications, the weak link is always going to be the QR code that kicks off the session with that app or the web session. If it's a proprietary app that has a proprietary mechanism for reading these codes and as a closed system, that provides a much greater level of security to the user and to their data. So those closed kind of applications are what would be needed to provide the security layers that are being needed here. We are not seeing that yet as a requirement for DPP and technologies like that or implementations like that, where the requirement is that no proprietary app be needed to scan the QR code. So these are some of the things that I think you could do to secure the data in a closed environment of your own managed app with your own managed services.
Yeah, and this is the idea of a security layer and proliferating that throughout the application. That does take a really long time. And for instance, in all the major currencies in the world, there are secret encodings in there that prevent you from copying that on a fancy color copier and making fake money. That type of thing took a long time to get installed, but fake money is, probably something you don't want to allow to continue. So if you're a state actor and you have, giant printing presses and you can fake $100 US $100 bill, that kind of thing you might not be able to stop. But if you're at home, you won't be able to make a copy of that $100 bill. That took a consortium effort, and that type of thing, if it becomes big enough with QR codes, it's going to be something that in the future we might have to look at. Hopefully it won't ever get to that point. And really, of course, percentage wise, that the QR codes that are out there, there's just not even a measurable percentage of false QR codes at this point. The whole point of this talk is to get people to be aware that it is a problem that could grow into something that really is substantial.
So before I let you get in, Mark, before I let you get in, can I just ask a really quick follow-up from the audience, because it plays in very nice to what Sprague just said. So either Mark or Sprague, so to follow on to the question, even if I add this additional security, is there still a way a fake QR code is going to just bypass all these security enhancements?
What's going to happen is that they will hijack your QR code for other activities, not necessarily to get into your system. What will likely happen is they're going to create what we call a parallel path. If you have an authentication solution that is using a QR code on a product, I don't need to hack into your system. I don't even care about your authentication system as a counterfeiter. What I will do is create a replica authentication solution that runs outside of your environment, convinces the customer that their product is authentic, and you will never see that authentication occur on your systems or with your app. So the challenge is not them getting into your system. That's less likely. What will happen is they'll use the fact that there is a QR code to convince the customer to scan it, and they will take over a parallel path of whatever activity they want to have alongside your legitimate activity. And to Sprague's point, we're seeing the stats that I got this week was that about 2% of QR codes in the United States have malicious content. So it's more than just an immeasurable size. 2% is the number that is being used today for the number of malicious QR codes. And that's coming from the cybersecurity industry, who are monitoring these scans in various systems.
That might be a little high, but
since
I have looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of QR codes, and I've yet to find an actual malicious QR code out in the wild. But that doesn't necessarily mean I've seen them all, for sure.
Right, that's for sure. And also, there's always, you got to remember that sector base here in the United States, the difference between, especially today, a QR code on a parking meter has a high rate of return, right? Because you're going to be capturing payment information versus changing my cereal box example, a personal size cereal box to a large cereal box. While that is definitely happening in the United States, there has been criminal cases just this year in Florida and in Michigan. It may not be the same rate of return as some other attacks. But what we're here today to do is raise awareness about this and start talking about what solutions could be. So going off of that, we have another question from the attendees. Is there any lessons from outside supply chain, payments, healthcare, travel, anything that can accelerate the adoption, or any models that we should be looking at to accelerate the safe adoption of QR codes?
So in the payments and the financial sector, there's a number of initiatives that are working in parallel to try and create a proprietary, secure alternative to the standard QR code. X9 is one of the initiatives in the payments industry. It's a consortium of fintech companies that are trying to get together to create a secure proprietary implementation of a QR code with a signature embedded in it. That's one for the financial services. It's not been adopted yet. It's still a proof of concept. As Sprague mentioned, that Kevin from Dennison has produced a next generation of QR code that has secure content. Again, it's secure content, meaning the content can't be changed, but the QR code can still be copied or replaced. Nothing's going to stop that. But the content of their QR code cannot be manipulated and is read with a proprietary app. Again, a proprietary QR code-like solution that is implemented either alongside or instead of the open standard. And I know I can't remember the actual spec, but the Europeans are also working together to perhaps generate a proprietary QR code-like standard for payments specifically. So we're seeing outside of the supply chain industry, certainly in payments and fintech and fin services, that they're trying to understand how they give a QR code-like experience with a secure proprietary environment that is not standard. So that's what I've seen so far, and that's where some of those initiatives are going.
And I just want to add quickly on that. You know, the magnitude of the problem will dictate how much you need to put in to solving it. And the secure QR code, you can copy that exact QR code and you will get past the security. If you just enter the data that you read on your phone from that QR code, then you will get caught. If you add something similar to one of these products that Digimarc has just come out with, where you cannot copy it. If you copy it, you will get caught. Even if you put the same data in, you will get caught. So there are different layers you can add depending on the size of the problem.
Correct. So as we start to wrap up the session for today, what simple steps should businesses take to attack this? What things can businesses do at this point in time, one step that they should take to secure their QR code strategy?
I think we need to get different parts of the organization working together, because I think there's a lack of awareness between perhaps the marketing organization and consumer engagement organization and the cybersecurity team that are facing these threats on a daily basis. So I think raising the awareness within the organization that you don't just want to shotgun QR codes all over the place, give people access to your back-end data and services, if there is a more secure way of doing it. I think it's just the arbitrary nature of marketing or other consumer engagement organizations deploying QR codes without the consultation of the industry and cybersecurity teams to understand how you can implement those applications in a more secure and effective way. So I think awareness and understanding would be good.
Greg?
So if I was a company, I would want to make sure that the people reading my QR code would have some idea of where it's supposed to go. And the great thing about the GS1 digital link is it links through the G10, which is the number on a on a serial box basically that gets scanned from a UPC, indicating that product. That's one thing. Second thing is it takes you to a website, and if it's like a brand, you can maybe add information under that QR code saying this is the website it will be taking you to. For instance, pg.com, something like that. And that way, at least there's a chance that people can scan that. And if that website is not in there, then they get an idea that something is wrong. But that's the trouble with something that is proliferating as broadly as this QR code appears to be doing. Is it's people will find a way to mess it up, probably.
And as we start to close the session, Mark, would a 2FA authentication help B2B applications?
Yeah, and the two-factor authentication component would be to have a scanner of the QR code and then to have additional information that was a two-factor authentication component for that QR code. This is, again, another great way of adding a simple security layer to a QR code to be able to provide a two-factor authentication the same way as when you log into your bank account, you get a text message with a code to input. So having those tokens or those abilities to generate a two-factor authentication from a QR code scan using an app would be, again, another step to adding a greater level of security to the products.
So as
But
we come to
it has to be simple in the end, though. That's the
right, it has to be simple, also people won't do it.
Yeah.
So as we were bringing this session to a close today, really quick, Mark and Sprague, do you think consumer trust in scanning QR codes is growing or shrinking?
Oh, I think it's growing very fast.
And I think the additional awareness is going to make the trust shrink. The number of news articles in national newspapers and international newspapers about the risks of QR code is becoming more regular, and I think that message will get out to more people, and the trust will be diminished.
So in summary, we just want to say, QR codes themselves, just like credit cards, just like Wi-Fi, are not inherently unsafe. They have brought about benefits to consumers and businesses, but because of the popularity, they're becoming more and more mainstream. And as products or devices become more mainstream, there are increased risk from bad actors. By combining standard driven practices on the business side, continuing these conversations and recognizing the need that something needs to be done with basic vigilance on the consumer side, we can all reduce the risk together and increase the benefits that this technology enables. I'd like to thank you for attending our session today and pass it back to Bethany.
All right, thank you everyone for joining this session today, and thank you to our panel for their insights. If you have any additional questions for us here at AIM or any of the speakers, you can reach out to them at the information listed on the screen here. And I wanted to thank everyone. Say have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
again
you.
for attending.
Bye-bye.